There we go. Part 3, personality, social cognitive perspective. So, in the social cognitive perspective, we're looking at how a person interacts between the environment and their cognition, basically. And cognition, right? Cognition, right, is your way of thinking. So, social is your environment, right? That's what's around you. Cognitive is your cognition, what you're thinking. So, how the way you're thinking, how this interacts, your personality with the environment, and that's how you're, oh, there we go, live your life. So this is just an entire perspective. More specifically, in the social cognitive perspective, this idea called reciprocal determinism. And reciprocal determinism is the interacting influences of three things: behavior, internal cognition, and consequences. You can remember this, so how these three things interact. You can remember this easily with the mnemonic ABCs, okay? So A stands for affect, and remember affect, let's see there, affect is your way of your thoughts or emotions, okay? Or thoughts and emotions. B is your behavior, and C is the consequences, okay? So the ABCs: affect, which is your thoughts or emotions; B, your behavior; C, consequences. So reciprocal determinism, how your thoughts and emotions interact with your behavior and the consequences of them. All right, so this is reciprocal determinism. Okay, so remember the ABCs: affect, behavior, consequences. Sometimes reciprocal determinism can be kind of hard to understand. So let's break this down. The two words. So we have reciprocal and we have determinism. In case that didn't make sense earlier, reciprocal is when two parties exchange something. Okay, so when you have two parties exchange something, so in this case, you're having the environment exchange something with you. So you and your environment are interacting with each other. You're exchanging things. Reciprocal. Okay, you have two things that are exchanging something. Determinism is an inevitable consequence. So reciprocal determinism then would be how the interaction of the environment and yourself exchange things, and then based on that interaction, you're going to have this consequence as a result of it. That's inevitable. Okay, so reciprocal determinism. Some different, this is just something that kind of a wrap up here of different ways of which we've talked about in personality, how going back to chapter 2 to the research methods unit chapter, um, how case study, survey, observation, experimentation, right? These are the different research methods. This right here is kind of what you want to look at, is this middle column and then these over here. But this tells you, we've talked about a lot of different theories and different perspectives thus far. And these kind of give you a good idea of what, where each one fits in. So case study, psychoanalytic, right? Who did case studies? Freud. How did Freud get his patients? I mean, how did he get these studies? He took his patients, right? People that were already mentally disturbed or had mental problems, either self-diagnosed or otherwise, and they would go talk to him. So his population sample was people that already probably had problems to begin with, and he looked at them and he made observations about that, and he came up with a theory. So he basically made his entire theory on case studies, right? Humanistic also can use case studies, right? Because each person to reach their full potential, right? That's kind of the idea behind humanism. All right, so then here's some benefits, weaknesses over on this side. Surveys, right? Trait theory obviously would be a survey. We talked about that in the last part. Positive psychology, which is a bit about this stuff that we'll be talking about here today. You can use surveys. Psychodynamic, projective tests, trait theory, again, personality inventories. And then we've got the social cognitive uses observation, right? We see how the environment and the person interacts, and then experimentation. You can put somebody in a particular environment and watch how they interact while controlling for all other variables. Because remember, experimentation controls for all variables. Okay, so that's just a quick rundown. Take a little look, pause this, look at this, because this is kind of important to help wrap everything up. If you can understand this, you got a pretty good handle on this unit. Okay, so personal control. People can have two types of control. What's called an internal locus of control and an external locus of control. Internal locus of control means that you are responsible for it. An external locus of control means that something outside of you is responsible for whatever happened. So an internal locus of control. I got an A on the test. If I believe that I was the cause for getting an A on that test, then it's an internal locus of control. If I believe that I got an A on the test only because it was as difficult as a kindergartner would take, then maybe that might be an external locus of control. It wasn't me that got the A, it was just because it was a super easy test. Another example, kind of the flip of that, which is often used, you've probably done this yourself, external locus of control. You get a bad grade in class, all right? So you get a bad grade on the test. You probably have an external locus of control in that case, which means that it wasn't you who got the bad grade. It was because the teacher made the test too darn hard, or it was impossible, or they didn't give you enough time to study. So it was outside of you, right? It was somebody else's fault that you didn't do as well on the test as you should have. Internal locus of control would mean you didn't study hard enough, you should have learned the material better, it was your fault, okay? And so depending on how you view your situations and your lot in life determines whether you have an internal locus of control and external locus of control. And generally, happier people generally are realistic about this, but in general, when good things happen, they have an internal locus of control, and when bad things happen, they have an external locus of control. This generally keeps you happy. So the things you can change, right, that you be real about it. Things you can change, you should have an internal locus of control. Things you can't change, make them external, right? And so if you didn't get a promotion, it's not necessarily your fault that you didn't get that promotion. You could have worked your tail off to earn that promotion or to get accepted to that college. It might not be you. You could have done everything you could. It could have been, the external locus of control says it was not up to you anymore, right? It was the admissions officer or it was the manager or whatever who chose that. So how you view the situation, right? Whether it's you who had control or whether it's somebody else who had control can help decide, your personal happiness. So this is kind of positive psychology stuff here. This internal, external, they deal heavily in positive psychology. Okay. Quick thing on explanatory styles. Again, this is more with the positive psychology stuff. How you explain situations in your life can determine whether you're an optimist or a pessimist, right? Optimists view the world positively, pessimists view it negatively. So you can explain different situations in different ways. So you can explain it through three different lenses. Was it permanence? So permanence, was it permanent? Will the life have a permanent effect on you? Optimists believe that bad events are temporary. Pessimists believe that bad events are going to be with them forever. It's going to permanently affect their life, right? Pervasiveness. Pervasiveness means how much is this life event going to affect all other areas? How is it there's going to be like a ripple effect through the rest of my life? Again, optimists think there's going to be good events are going to have spillover. Pessimists think that good events are just going to reach them. It's not going to have any effect on the rest of their life, and vice versa, right? Bad events, pessimists think they're going to have spillover, etc. And then finally, personal. How are these events somehow due to your own personality? Again, just as you might expect, optimists think that positive events are personal and negative events aren't personal, and pessimists are the opposite. So how you view these things can determine your personal happiness, right? And that's what has to do with positive psychology. A couple more things to talk about. Self-esteem. There's this idea called the spotlight effect, and younger people tend to have this more. Spotlight effect is this idea that everybody around you is watching you, is paying attention to your failures, paying attention to your appearance, your performance, when in reality, right? So spotlight effect means that you think more so that actually really is happening, that people are watching you and judging you. Children, teenagers, young adults tend to have a much stronger spotlight effect. As you get older, you tend to care less, usually, generally, across life. And so the spotlight effect is just this idea that we think that everybody's watching us. So when we fail, or we embarrass ourselves, right? In real life, people don't really give a crud whether you what you did, and for the most part, unless you're a celebrity, right? They're going to laugh about it maybe right there in that minute, and then they're going to forget about it 10 minutes later, and they're never going to remember that you had that mess up or whatever it was. So that's that. Um, there's this another self-esteem, right? Is how you feel about yourself, right? It's not necessarily based in reality. It's just how you feel about yourself, and that's kind of a problem. Could become a problem with self-esteem, because you could feel great about yourself, and you could be crappy at whatever you're doing. So self-esteem is just how you feel. It has no basis necessarily in reality, although it should have a basis in reality. It doesn't have to, right? It's just how you feel. If your self-esteem is based on, products of what you've done and results and consequences of actual tangible things that you've done in your life, then it's good. High self-esteem. But a lot of times, we pump up people with this false self-esteem, like the better they are, and then when they find out that they're not as good as they think they are, they're crushed. And so it might not be as a positive thing as we think we're doing when we're building somebody up. Um, Another thing that goes along with self-esteem is this thing called the self-serving bias, or the better than average phenomenon. We tend to think that we're better than we actually are in most things, right? Studies have been done. Um, if you think you're in the in a group of people, what percentage are you better than average, worse than average, or right in the middle, as far as intelligence? And consistently, when they do these types of studies, upwards of 70% think that they're better than average. All right. Well, guess what? That's impossible, right? Because average is 50%. So how is 70% better than 50%? So it's impossible for this to be. But we tend to have this idea that we're better than we really are. And so we have this self-serving bias that biases our own personal value and uh, goodness, if you will, higher than it probably actually is. If you remember back, Alfred Adler, sorry, remember him, and he had the inferiority complex. Well, this is like the opposite of the inferiority complex. Inferiority complex is probably actually not as prevalent as people would think. It's actually much more common to have a cross that inferiority out. We have this superiority. We tend to think that we're better than we are. So we have the superiority complex is more common than an inferiority complex that Adler um, proposed. All right, and then finally, culture and self-esteem. Two types of ways of looking at kind of the world is individualism and collectivism. Individualism, exactly like it sounds, the individual's self-worth is more important than the group as a whole, and collectivism, the group as a whole, is more important than the individual's self-worth. Again, here's another table that kind of shows some differences between individualism and collectivism. The concept of the self, person's independent. In collectivism, the person's interdependent. They depend on everybody else, so they depend on the group for their self-worth. Life tasks, in an individual society, discover and express one's uniqueness, and in a collective society, maintain connection, fit in, perform role. All right, relationships, right? Many, often temporary, casual, confrontation, acceptable for in an individualist society, and then you go to a collective society, and there's few, close, enduring relationships, and there's harmony values. So confrontation is not really acceptable. And so Japan is a pretty common example of a collectivist society, right? You may have seen the Japanese school children all wearing the exact same uniform, right? Because they find harmony and peace as being part of one kind of flowing um, life force, as it will, for lack of a better term. And individualism is basically all the countries in the West, the quote unquote West, USA, Western Europe, etc. These are all individualistic societies. Okay, so that's about it, what we have here with personality. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.